Good morning. Today's July 21st, and today's dynamic dialogue is about supplier scorecards. So as you know, these are weekly webinars that we're doing indefinitely. The link that you have is good for all of the sessions through July. If you are listening after the fact, then you'll have a new link in your email notification, but I welcome thoughts, ideas, and suggestions for new topics. I thought I would share this little cartoon about messaging. So the whole point of scorecards is messaging and sharing with your suppliers your assessment. And I thought this one made me smile when I looked at it, and it says the data is blank, but the conclusion is already drawn. And the conclusion says that eating chocolate will make you look younger and thinner. And that's, that's not a bad thing. So if that was true, that would be great for all of us. But I'm not sure that that's really true. So we have to be careful about the message we send, and we do want it to be backed up by data. We don't want it to be fill in the blank and figure out how to just make this thing a legal way to share information. So what we're going to do first is talk about some of the misconceptions around scorecards. I know in the past when I've been working as a manager and I talked to my staff and said, I want to do regular scorecards, I get groans, I get eye rolls, I get, oh, it's too much work, it's hard to do, they take so much time, and we just don't have time to do that. If you think that, then you're not looking at scorecards in the right light and looking at what they can do for you and your organization. Scorecards are not all that time consuming to prepare. If you're managing your supplier and taking into account what's going on with that supplier, they don't take that much time to prepare. They don't require a lot of extensive reports because, as I said, if you're managing your supplier and you're paying attention to how they're performing, then you don't need a lot of extra reports. You do need some consensus and you do need some input from your stakeholders, but that again is what you should be doing managing your suppliers. And the PowerPoint slides, they don't have to be 50, 60 slides long. You can make them as long or kind of as short as you see fit. Other people tell me, well, if we don't do it for all of them, we can't do it. It doesn't make sense. And that's not correct either. You really don't want to do full-on scorecards for everyone. There are a couple of different ways to do scorecards, and we're going to talk about those today, but it doesn't have to be consistent for 100% of your suppliers. Your suppliers are not all alike. They are not all the same, and you want to make sure that you're looking at those in terms of segmentation, in terms of the suppliers that are really key to your business, that do something unique for you, that do something custom for you, or that involves intellectual property, or where most of your money is being spent. So you want to understand your supply base. Some of the other misconceptions are that if you send the information to the suppliers, I can print the report out of SAP, Oracle, or whatever. I can send them the report on their delivery, on their quality, and then they're going to take care of it. That's not really correct. If you got that from your manager and your manager just gave you a performance review, never spoke with you about it, never talked to you about how that might affect your raise, your promotions, your career growth, and just gave you periodically a little summary of this is how you're doing. If there's no follow-up, if there's no more feedback, if there's no corrective action required, you're going to keep doing the same thing you're doing. It may not get you a better result, but if you're not being asked to do something different, to change something, or being told specifically that if you don't take corrective action, that is going to have an impact on your potential career path, your potential status as an employee, then you're not going to do anything. So you need to understand that there's consequences. You need to hold your suppliers accountable and make sure they're taking responsibility. But the only way you can do that is to actually engage them in that discussion of feedback. So they do require follow-up from customers. As a customer with your suppliers, you have to know what you're asking for. You have to make sure they're giving you what you're asking for, the way that you're asking for it. And if not, then you need to have some discussions about what needs to change so that can continue and to get better. So you have that continuous improvement. If they are doing well, then you also want to follow that up and let them know they're doing well and encourage them to keep up the good work. Because again, if your manager doesn't tell you once in a while that you're doing a good job and you're doing kind of what you think is over and above, then pretty soon you're going to slack off too. If they don't notice that you're doing an excellent job, that you're really coming through for them, then where is your incentive to keep doing those kinds of things, going over and above, if there's no recognition, if there's no understanding, if there's no appreciation? Another common objective or common misconception is that objective data is what you have to have. It has to only be objective things that you can measure, that you can quantify. That's not exactly the whole piece of that. So there's the manner of performance. There's a lot of other subjective pieces of performance that you want to make sure that you assess and that you give feedback on. If you only have objective data, then you're not going to be able to hit those soft skills. And if you don't do that, then that whole manner of performance and the whole performance assessment loses something in the quality and in the scope of what you're feeding back. So you do want objective data, but you also want to talk about some of the other things that you need from the supplier, and some of that can be very subjective. And that's okay. They can be very brief. Like quality and delivery stats, you can give metric information and you can give feedback to your suppliers on quality and delivery, but that is not a full scorecard. That doesn't cover the range of things that you want and need to be covering with your suppliers. Other departments have told me, well, this is just our supply chain group, our procurement group. This is the buyers and the commodity managers, category managers. So we don't, we're the ones doing this. We don't have to share it with anyone else in the organization because we're the interface with the supplier. That again is not correct. You really need to give the supplier a full look at what the customer's perspective is. That includes all interfaces for that supplier. That may be production in terms of quality. That may be the quality department if you have a separate quality department. That may be engineering if you're working on developing things, designing things. It may be the financial people involved if you're trying to get invoices straightened out and correct deliveries. It may be the warehouse if the packaging isn't right, or if the delivery method of delivery isn't right, or if you're having damage or incorrect documentation. So whoever interfaces with that supplier and is able to assess their performance, they should be polled at least once or twice throughout the year when you do these scorecards. And the biggest thing that I've heard that frankly was an irritant to me is when people said, it's just a waste of time. It doesn't do any good. It doesn't do any good if you don't do it correctly and if you don't do the follow-up and follow-through that's required. But scorecards are a very vital part of doing business with suppliers today, and they're very important to overall good supplier management. So these are used in a lot of different ways. They should be part of regular business reviews, and we'll talk about which suppliers to target in just a minute. They should be used to measure performance and to drive improvements from your suppliers. Scorecards are a way to feedback on that performance, show where the gaps are, and encourage suppliers to close those gaps and to either do better or to keep doing just as well and stay with their pedal to the metal kind of thing. It's also a good way to look at suppliers. These assessments can help you say, you know, this is a good supplier. We need to keep them in our supply base. So if the project we're working on with the supplier is end of lifing, then we need to find other work for them because we'd like them in our supply base. They're easy to deal with, or they're good to deal with. They have good quality, good performance, and we want to keep them. Or it can say, you know what, I'm glad this project is ending because this supplier has been very difficult to deal with. They are not coming up to our standards. And so at this point, we're going to complete this project with them, and then we're going to discontinue them, not add them to our new business list. They can help you improve relationships with your suppliers because they Scorecards involve so many different aspects of doing business, and the business reviews that you're going to want to do have more than just one person in attendance. It should have good representation from your supplier across their stakeholder functions. It really can help you, excuse me, improve a negotiating position. It can help you because you're going to learn more about that supplier. The supplier is going to learn more about your business. You're going to understand how you can work better together, and that's going to help you negotiate. It doesn't mean that it's going to give you another lever or a hammer. What it does mean is it's going to open that to more collaboration, to more transparency, to a better relationship, and to the idea of a long-term relationship which helps your negotiating position. If both parties acknowledge and agree that they want a long-term agreement or a long-term relationship, then when you're negotiating, you're going to keep that in mind, and you're going to put that as one of the forefront things that you want to keep this relationship going. And that isn't at all cost or to the detriment of every other goal that you have, but it is a key goal, and it does help parties work better together and work harder to get a solution that's good for both parties. It's a great way to reward your high-performing suppliers, and we'll talk about ways that you can do that as part of this whole process. When you have suppliers that are delivering continuously and repetitively, consistently, you want to acknowledge that. You want to reward that. If you have suppliers that you have been more transactional with and you'd like to get a more strategic relationship, scorecards are a great way to do it. This pulls in other layers of management, other stakeholders from the supplier, and you get sponsors and you get a much stronger relationship with that supplier. That helps both organizations work better together over a longer period of time. And if you use a scoring system, it helps you get a basis for comparing suppliers. For instance, if you have 2, maybe 3 machine parts suppliers that are working for you, doing pretty much the same job, but they have different parts of your business, then if you have scores, you can compare and contrast, and you can look at that. You can use that for incentive. You can tell them that they are not the best of your machine shop, machine parts suppliers, and that here's how they can do that, how they can get to that top place. Or you can tell them that, yes, you are performing the best and we need you to stay there, or there's other people that would really like the business that you have. So the possibility of losing business if you don't retain your position is a real possibility. So you want to look at what you want into the scorecard. Now, this is a shopping list that you can use. This doesn't mean you have to have all of these elements in every scorecard, but you should pick and choose the ones that are most important. And you should use probably 5 to 7 different aspects of business that you do with the supplier to include. So a lot of organizations look at delivery, and delivery, as we know, is very important. A lot of companies that I've worked for have the mantra of 3 days early, no days late, and that's considered on time. And delivery is a great metric, and we all depend on that. And with leaner organizations and less inventory, you really want to make sure that your inventory is there when you need it in the condition it is. The problem with measuring delivery is it's hard to measure. It's not hard at any one aspect, but it's hard to compare. You can look at the supplier's ship date. If the supplier shipped it on time, then you can, with a standard lead times, a span time for delivery, say 3 to 5 days, you could use 4 days, you could use 3 days, you could use 5 days, but you could, whatever standard you set, if it's a 5-day delivery up to 5 days, then if the supplier shipped it at least 5 days before your delivery, but no more than, say, 8 days, then you should arrive in that 3 days early, no days late. But it's hard to measure that. It's hard to ascertain exactly what happened. You're looking at different carriers. You're looking at the process of, does that mean it's on the dock, ready to go? Does that mean that they've actually given it to the carrier? What if the carrier is in Asia and you're putting things on the water? How much time do you allow for that? All of those things. And then you've got all of the things that happen with, what if there's a strike at the dock? What if there is a hiccup in the delivery carrier? What happens if there's a weather impairment? What happens if you have an issue and your dock is full that day, or it's not open for some reason and they try to deliver it and it doesn't come in? How do you know that? How do you track all of that? So it's a harder thing to look at. You can take the stats off of your MRP, ARP system, and that's good. It also gets complicated if you have a lot of deliveries that come in one day and you're looking at your transaction records, and you see that, oh, it didn't get recorded into our system until this date. Well, it might have sat on your dock for 3 days because your staff was busy, you couldn't get to it, they didn't have time to unload all that, they had a lot of shipments going in as well as coming out, and so they weren't able to transact everything and get that cleaned up. It also gets compounded and complex if you have incoming inspection. So do you count from the day that it passes incoming inspection and actually gets transacted into your inventory? Do you count the day that it hits the dock, regardless of whether it passes the incoming inspection or not? How much time do you allow for incoming inspection? It can get very, very complicated. I know one organization that I was working with, they had about a 2-week window to get things through incoming inspection. So when you're looking at when the supplier ships versus what it takes to go through your incoming inspection, you could be very early or you could be very late, and it's not any fault of the supplier. So you have to be careful how you measure that. Quality is a little more objective, but not always. You have to look at lots received, you have to look at number of pieces in the lot, you have to look at a lot of different aspects. And then if the lot is accepted, but you have rejects on the floor, are you looking at rework that it cost you to do that? Are you looking at the rejects, the repairs, the returns that you're doing to send it back to the supplier to get it fixed? Do you want to count all of that? Or are you simply looking at number of lots received, number of lots transacted, or through incoming inspection or whatever? So you have to be very clear about that. Cost and cost reduction goals, that's a good measure. You start with whatever your agreed upon cost is. It has to be adjusted if, for instance, you have cost reductions year over year, or if you have allowed cost increases year to year, you have a longer term contract. If you have a mitigating circumstance, like you change the design and that changes the cost up or down one way, maybe you do a redesign and take some parts out, and so the price goes down significantly. That's good. How do you track that goal? As just a cost reduction, or do you track it as a process improvement or a design change, or? If the supplier gets to a certain volume and can go to a more automated process, then again, you're looking at how is the cost work, who gets the cost savings, how it's going to get reported. So up and down, that kind of gets complex to do. Responsiveness has a lot of different aspects. The responsiveness is how quick they are to respond to your requests for information, formal RFPs, RFIs, RFQs, or just inquiries, how fast they can respond to your request to ramp up or ramp down. So it can be part of the flexibility, the agility in there. That can be another element of the scorecard if you choose to do that. It can be how quick do you respond to like corrective actions, requests, problems. Do you have the right sense of urgency? So there's a lot of aspects of that, and each business has to figure out what's important to them. Technology is a good thing to look at. Are you updating your equipment? Are you changing? Are you modifying? Are you adding? And are you maintaining? So there's a lot of aspects of that depending on what your supplier is making for you. If you have a very small business and your customer is very large, then your business fit may not be exactly on parity. Same thing if your business is very large and you have a very small business. So you want to, that can be a part of your scorecard. How is this working? Because our systems don't mesh. We have a lot of different challenges and a lot of different things going on. So that can be an issue. Whatever your sustainability goals are, your social responsibility goals, internally, whether you're doing a diverse supplier base, if you're trying to add diverse suppliers, that's a good thing. If you're identifying risks as well as opportunities, they can be part of the scorecard. How did we manage the risk that we had identified before? What are the opportunities that we're seeing? What can we do? Compliance is a big deal. So there's a lot of issues around compliance. What does your company require? What is the government require? What is the import-export requirements? What are any of the numbers of things that you have to comply with? And then program management, how your supplier is managing the program that is your business and making sure that you get your parts on time and you have the right priority within the factory. So I see a couple of questions. Let me just look at those. Customer satisfaction is a large part of that. You can put that on the scorecard. That really comes from you as a customer giving this feedback, but you can also flip that around and ask your supplier to give you feedback on how you are as a customer. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. For aerospace companies, AS9100 companies that are trying to be compliant or are compliant, they're required to review the on-time delivery and quality of their suppliers. So you have to do that to monitor that, and somebody needs to be looking at that. And honestly, whether you're AS9100 or not, you need to be looking at those quality and delivery metrics. But it's important that you understand how you're going to measure that, how you're going to assess that. Make sure your supplier is in sync with that method and understands how you're measuring it. So you don't come up with one answer and they say, oh, that's not what we have. We have a very different metric. And our metric to you says 99% and your metric to me says 94%. Well, that's not right. So you don't want to get in this stuck in the middle with how you're going to measure that. You want to agree to that up front. So you can do scorecards that I say are like auto-generated. You get reports out of your MRP system, you can get your on-time delivery, and you can get exception reports. So you can send to your supplier a report, say every week, every month, twice a month, however often you designate. You can say, this is your on-time delivery. These are the shipments you sent me, and this is the on-time percentage. Or you can send just an exception report. If you don't get a report from me this week, this month, it means that everything we received was deemed on time, except that when you do get a report, that says this was either too early or this was received late. So you can do exception reports or you can do all of it. You can look at percents, you can look at number of lots, and it's important to look at that because if you only have one delivery from a supplier and it is 1 day late, they could get a 0%. And a 0% looks pretty bad. And to be a day late is not good. But again, it could have mitigating reasons. It could have a lot of different root causes for that one shipment that was late. Versus a supplier that sent you 10 lots and had one delivery that was late. So they would get a 90% score, which looks much better than the 0% score, but it's still 1 out of 10, which isn't great. So you have to look at a lot of different information to really assess that if you're going to get auto-generated reports. The same thing with quality. You can look at the lots rejected. How many lots did you receive? How many did you reject? Or how many did you reject? How many did you accept? And that's the total number of lots received. However you want to do it. You can do it on a percentage basis, which has the same challenge that if you only get one lot and it gets rejected, you get 0%. And it's the same is true if it's 100%. If you see 100%, 100%, 100%, but some of these suppliers had one lot or one delivery, then that's good, but that's not nearly as good as the supplier that had 20 different deliveries that hit all of those on 100%. So you want to look at what is driving that and what is the whole context of what your supplier is doing for you. The other thing with quality often is corrective action reports. Many companies have logs of those. If we have a corrective action request that we've issued, you have so many days to respond and then put containment in, corrective action, do your analysis to find that. And so we want those statuses. A lot of times that is in a database that you can generate a report from. So no corrective actions is a good thing. And if you have a corrective action, you could send the supplier, you could send them a daily report, a weekly report, whatever makes sense to you to do that. So these are good tools to use. The advantage is they're easy to run. They're easy to distribute. You can program most of those to say, run this report for all of these suppliers and send it out once a week. And I actually, at one point, I worked with a colleague in the same company that I worked for in a different division. And they made a nice presentation about what they did. They got this automated. They were sending reports every week to the supplier on their quality and their delivery. And they were very excited about that. And they were very proud of what they did. And I said, do you have any tracking mechanisms? And they really didn't understand the question. And I said, well, are your suppliers getting better? Are they getting worse? Do you know which suppliers are the worst? Do you know which suppliers are the best? And you know, are you rewarding the suppliers that are consistent and hitting everything? And what are you doing to improve their performance, the ones that aren't making that? And they said, nope. They sent it out to the suppliers. They sent them a letter and they said, if you are below this threshold, then you need to take corrective action and get back to us. And I said, okay, how many suppliers are actually doing that? And the number was very small, if any, because again, the customer wasn't holding the supplier accountable. They were giving them information, but it was like a one-way communication. It went out, but what came back wasn't as comprehensive as they needed to actually improve this and make this a meaningful metric to both parties. So the challenge on these types of scorecards is that distribution does not equal communication or understanding. So you can send a letter one time and or you can send a letter every time you send the report. But if nobody calls and says, what are you doing about that? Again, the first time they see that they get a 0%, they may get very nervous. But if the customer doesn't contact them, doesn't follow up, doesn't ask for corrective action, doesn't find out if they're doing anything different, then pretty soon they're going to say, okay, just file it. They're sending us a report, but they're not looking at it. So if they're not looking at it, I'm not going to look at it. I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing as a supplier, which is the best I can. And if it's not good enough, well, they're not really saying anything or holding me accountable for that. So it requires the analysis, it requires the follow-up, and it requires corrective action so that somebody's doing something to change that and actually grow. So manual scorecards for delivery, the things we just looked at, if you have manual scorecards, you can also add in information on packaging, any defects in the packaging, any recommendations or changes you'd like to make to the packaging, find out if they're delivering full orders versus partial orders, because a lot of times if you get 2 partials, you still show 2 lots delivered, 2 lots accepted, and no issue with delivery, except that maybe even if they were, maybe one was late and the other one wasn't, or maybe they were both on time because you had a wide enough window where you got both of them in that window, and yet what they did is they made 2 shipments where they should only have made 1. And then any paperwork errors on packaging slips or invoices or any of the information that's supposed to be there that isn't, or that's incorrect, or. So manual scorecards allow you to include a lot more about the delivery. Same thing about the quality. If you're doing a manual scorecard, you can include things like inline defects that may not come out easily on a report. You can talk about the quantity of defects that you've seen. You can talk about the specifics of the defects that you've seen. You can also talk about the impact that it had to your line in terms of rework or downtime, or the return that it cost you. Or maybe you had to stop the line and do a complete sort of their product. And then you can share that impact with the supplier if you have a manual scorecard. On the responsiveness, that's very hard to automate, but you can add in things like how quick are they responding to your questions. You can put information in there on how quickly they're able to turn requests for information, requests for proposals, requests for quotes. You can say these are open, that took these too long to get closed, or these were incomplete, or anything that was an issue, or hey, thank you, you guys are great at turning around all of our RFXs. Whatever our request is, you guys are turning these well within our expected limits, and we appreciate that because we know that it takes time to put a proposal together. Cost I talked about a little bit before, increases, decreases. Sometimes when you order a smaller amount of something for an emergency or for a little more flexibility, that can show up in an in an automated report as an error. So I usually buy 1,000 of those, but I only needed 10 because I needed them for a prototype, and yet that showed up on my report, and that price was much higher than the price that I usually pay for the 1,000-piece lots. So you don't want to get into those kind of traps either. So the advantage of these scorecards is they're tailored, and the preparation forces you to review the data you have. So if you're doing a manual scorecard and you have to report on delivery, you have to go look at the data, and you have to go look at the pieces to do the analysis to actually put that together. The challenge is it does take a little bit of time. But once you get it compiled, you have to distribute it, and you have to distribute it individually to your suppliers. You can't do it en masse. And then by the time you do that, is the timeliness of your feedback to the supplier, is that an actionable time? Or are you sending something that happened 3 months ago that now is over and done with? You've moved on, they've moved on, and there's really no way to resolve it. There's nothing to do except acknowledge, oh, that sucked 3 months ago when we had to do this, this, and this. So you need to make sure that feedback is timely to your supplier, so you don't necessarily have to wait for a scorecard to give them that feedback, but you want to track that. So the audience. For automated things, you can blanket all suppliers. Like I said, my colleague came up with a report. He was sending it out to all the suppliers. That was a great thing to do as long as somebody was looking at that and following up on that. So you can send quality and delivery stats to everyone every week or every month, however you choose to do it. Or you can send the exception reports. So again, no news is good news. That if they don't get a report on their delivery or quality, then anything they sent me up till that point or since the previous report, which is a week ago or a month ago, then everything has been good in the meantime. So I suggest that these go out weekly or monthly, but no longer period than monthly. If you can automate it, then it's easy to send every week, and definitely every month or every 2 weeks, however you choose to do it. If they're manual, you really want to focus these more in-depth scorecards on your tier 1 suppliers, possibly a couple of your tier 2 suppliers, but really it's on the tier 1 suppliers, and it may not be 100% of the tier 1 suppliers. So you have to look at what's driving that relationship, what's driving that performance, and why is that supplier in that tier 1 area. If it's strictly on volume and cost, but it's what they're making is more of a build to stock part for them, so that there's not much information there, or they have this down pretty well, then maybe you don't need to do a full-on scorecard with them. Maybe you need to do something different. But many times, the tier 1 suppliers are the ones you really want to do these in-depth scorecards with. So I suggest quarterly. You can do some information weekly or monthly, whatever makes sense to do. You can always do exception reports, which means anytime you have an exception, you notify them very quickly, like within 24 hours. Make sure they acknowledge that within 24 hours so that you know they've received that information on that challenge and they're helping you to resolve it. And then usually you put these kinds of scorecards in the business review that you deliver either on a conference call or in person. So before COVID, my suggestions and strong recommendations were to do supplier scorecards every quarter, switch off between an in-person visit and a conference call. And then when you do the in-person visit, one time you go to the supplier and the other time the supplier comes to you. So that each business is traveling only once a year, which holds down the travel costs considerably, but you're getting together every quarter and going over the same information. You get to see what the supplier's doing at their site. They get to come in and see what's going on with your site. So you get a lot of different information, and you get a lot of shared insight that way. So when you use either one of these or both of these, you need to make sure that you acknowledge good performance and let suppliers know that's appreciated. You don't have to let them know every week, hey, good job, I got 2 things from you. But maybe on a quarterly basis, if you have a supplier from an automated report that has no exceptions, that you do something on a quarterly basis, and you can just have an email that you send out to say, thank you. We want to acknowledge that for the last quarter, your delivery was perfect, everything was within acceptable parameters, and we had no quality issues. Or we had great delivery, but we did have quality issues or whatever. It doesn't take very long. Once you create an email like that, it's standardized. You can send it out very quickly once you identify the recipients of that. So it's an easy thing to do, and it makes suppliers feel good. They know they're being acknowledged. They like being appreciated, just like we do as human beings. Everybody likes to feel like that we are heard, we are seen, and that our efforts are making a contribution. Poor performance really requires corrective action quickly, and it requires follow up and follow through. If you do a corrective action request, you never get that settled, or you never find root cause and close that corrective action out, then you're not doing your job as a customer, making sure that you are working through the issues together. So you want to raise these issues immediately, make sure they're addressed. You want to document all the actions, the due dates, the owners, all of that kind of thing. You want to make sure that this is documented so that, one, you put some corrective action and preventive action in, because if you're getting the same issue over and over from a supplier, then you have a problem and they have a bigger problem. Or maybe they have a problem and you have a bigger problem because you're using a supplier that's not fixing things. So you want to get to the root of that and make sure that they're closing things out. This whole process begins with the supplier classification. So as I said, you really want to look at your supply base on an annual basis, understand who are your tier 1 suppliers, and that's really who you want to go the extra mile and do the supplier scorecards with. You want to set your expectations with the supplier. You want to review those expectations every time you get together in case something's changed, in case you've changed the way you're going to measure something, in case they have a different process or a different application, or they may be able to do something better or more for you. They may be getting more equipment that says, hey, we can put your job on this piece of equipment now, which may be a better cost for you, a better shorter lead time, and it's going to help us be more productive, and it's going to help us too. So you want to set those expectations and reiterate those every time you get together. You need to agree ahead of time, as early as possible, once you ID these guys as tier 1 suppliers, how are you going to measure them? What are the performance? You set the expectations, so you said, this is what I need. Now, how am I going to measure that and assess that you're giving me what I need? So you want to agree on the metrics. But again, not just the metrics, but how you're going to measure it. I've seen many times where the supplier says, these parts are good. I tested them. They test good. When I do this test, they pass 100%. And they get to me as a customer and I say, not one of them works in my product. So we aren't testing the same. We don't have the same parameters. It may be a specification issue. It may be a production issue. It may be 100 things. But you want to make sure that the way you measure is the way the supplier understands you're going to measure, and that's how you're going to feed them back the information. Again, delivery is the same way. If you're going to look at ship date, great, then you're going to look at ship date. That means they have to acknowledge those ship dates. They have to give you insight into those ship dates as part of standard operating procedure, not after the fact, which is easier to do today, depending on who's paying for the shipping. So that comes into play as well. But you want to make sure you're measuring things the same way. You have to agree on what subjective metrics you're going to include. If you want to measure responsiveness, you have to define what responsiveness is to your company, which could be things like, for a corrective action request, we want acknowledgement within 24 hours that you've received the notice of corrective action request, that you have 72 hours to do containment and to give an update on what you're doing to contain it and what you're doing to get to the root cause. After 5 days or 5 working days, you may need another update from the supplier to say, this is where our status is. And you could say, we would like this, resolved and fixed within 10 working days. But if we can't do that, we at least need regular updates so that we know what's going on and what you're doing. Because some problems are very, very time consuming to solve and they're very complex. Others are pretty straightforward. Hey, we got it contained. We checked all of our finished goods. We checked all of our work in process. We sorted through. We took all the bad ones out. We've changed our process. We've retrained our operator. We've fixed our machine, whatever the issue is, and you shouldn't see this again. So within 3 or 5 days, it's done. Other times it takes longer, but you should let them know what that means. You should let them know what that means in terms of RFQs, RFIs, RFPs. We need this kind of return on those, and we need this kind of level of detail. So the responsiveness needs to be defined. So how you're going to measure that, what that looks like to you as a customer. You want to look at the stakeholders. So who's going to be involved with this supplier? Sometimes it's just the supplier and the supply chain, the buyer people, but maybe it's not. And if you have detail that you're going to this level with a scorecard process, it's usually not just a buyer and an account manager. It's usually the quality organization, maybe it's the production team, maybe it's the inventory warehousing people, it might be the design team, it might be all of the above, and it might be somebody else from a testing organization or whatever. So who are those key stakeholders from both organizations, not just positions, but names, and you want that escalation path defined as well. So you want to make sure you know who's involved with this, and not just people that have their hands on it, but who are the managing individuals, who are the people that are responsible for making these things happen. You determine your meeting schedule, your frequency. As I said, I still recommend quarterly, whether you can travel or not. You can do virtual meetings very easily now. Many people are finding they're much better at virtual meetings than they were last year when they were able to travel. So their meetings are better, their agendas are better, they're managing their time better. So how often are you going to meet? If you have issues with a supplier, you could be meeting every month. But for a full-on scorecard, you usually a quarterly is fine. Sometimes twice a year is fine. But not usually more than once a year is required unless you have a very small number of items that you're buying and with very long lead times. And then how are you going to conduct these meetings? Where are they going to be held? And then are you going to do Zoom or? The location can be different because sometimes you might want to meet in a headquarters location, or sometimes you might want to meet at the production location. So oftentimes when I had suppliers in Asia, we had a subdivision of a company that was making the product in Asia. We dealt with a domestic office where we placed the orders, and we had the account manager, but the actual production was done in Asia. So sometimes we went to Asia, sometimes we went to just the domestic site, but you have to decide that and make sure that you're in agreement of that ahead of time. You want to identify all the attendees that you need, required and as needed. Oftentimes when I traveled, we would do the meetings with a small team on site, 2, 3, maybe 4 people, and then we would bring other people into the meeting as needed. And they would do a conference call because we didn't need necessarily the design engineer to travel with us all the time to spend 2 days or something. And we tried to clump these together. So it might have been 2 or 3 different designers that were the key individuals for the 2 or 3 suppliers I was meeting, maybe throughout Singapore, Malaysia, China, wherever I was going. So you might do that. And that's fine as long as you have some consistency there. So, but you want to identify those people up front and let them know they might be required to participate. Not 100% of the time, but they need to participate. Identify your sponsors and all the stakeholders. So the sponsors are the more senior level managers. And then schedule the meetings. I suggest that you always have 2 meetings scheduled out so that you know when the next one is and the one after that in case something comes up and you need to change. In case we have another pandemic, the dates may not change, but the the manner of meeting might change, and you can either adhere to those dates or not. That also helps you avoid things like holidays that conflict and different, let your travel get planned in plenty of time, set plenty of time to get it approved through your system, whatever your requirements are for that, and to get the travel plans made. So 2 meetings out. So when you meet, then you have the next one planned, and then you just plan the next one after that. So the business reviews are really about sharing goals, projects, financial information. This is really where you want more than the people that are actively working on these parts all day, every day. You want to bring in your senior management. You want to bring in your general managers, your directors, your vice presidents. They don't have to stay for the whole meeting, and the meeting doesn't have to last a whole day. So you want to make sure that you get someone in there who can talk about the state of your union. What is your company up to? How are they doing? What are their goals? How are they performing to those goals? And what they need from that supplier. So you have to prep this person in advance, but again, it doesn't take hours to do that. They know what their business is, and you just have to give them a few key things about these key suppliers. Same thing from the supplier's perspective. Not only do you want to do this as a customer, but you want the supplier to have a chance to share their business review. What are their goals? What are their projects? I've been in these types of meetings where I find out that my supplier thinks that they may be bought out, or they may be spun off from a parent company that bought them 2 years ago, 3 years ago. Or you might find out that they're doing a major layoff, or they got a huge contract, and so they're going to have to add more people, which means it might affect the people that have been working on your products. So you want to know what's going on with the suppliers as much as you want to share what's going on with your company. It gives you a chance to look at the goals, look at their goals, look at your goals, get some common goals for what you're trying to do. It's a chance to give feedback to your supplier on how they're doing from your customer's perspective, and give the chance for the supplier to tell you, how are you doing as a customer? Because I worked for companies where I know I was a pain in the neck customer, because that was the nature of our business. We did government contracts. We were subject to a lot of restrictions, constraints, requirements, but that was what we had to deal with. And so if you acknowledge that and let the supplier know that, and they come back and tell you, yeah, you're a pain in the neck, okay, so what can we do about it? How can we make this better? So you really want to talk about not just what needs improvement, but what's going well. Everybody wants to hear something that they're doing right. Sometimes it's a struggle to find that, but you want to include that in there. So your meeting agenda has your presentations, then the scorecard, and then you're going to outline your agenda for the next meeting. The sponsor is going to talk about the business, the overview of that. The scorecard itself should have a detailed review of each metric, 1 to 3 bullets for each metric on what's going well, 1 to 3 on what needs improvement. It doesn't have to be a huge shopping list. You can say, hey, your delivery is great, on-time delivery is fine, no issues on packaging, that's great. What does need improvement? We need more flexibility in the lot sizes or whatever. And if you don't have anything to improve, then say that. Right now, we need no improvement. What we need is for you to keep maintaining and sustaining your current level of performance. That's very acceptable. Next, then go on to the next one. If you have that on all of the aspects, all of the components of the scorecard, you're probably not digging enough. There's probably something that you need them to improve on or change or do differently. So the format itself should be, I use PowerPoint slides. You can use Word, you can do a lot of different things, but PowerPoint seems to be an easy way to do this. So you have a quick review of your goals, 1 slide per performance topic. Again, your bullets on your pluses and minuses. You can use red, yellow, green. You can use plus, minus. You can use whatever makes sense. Some companies like stoplights with the red, yellow, green. If it's green, you don't spend too much time. You go on. If it's yellow, you talk about this. And if it's red, you say, this is what we got to fix, like now. So you want to, at the end, summarize, where do I need you to focus? So I just went through 8 different metrics, but the 1 or 2 things I really need you to improve on this next quarter, this next 6 months are these two things. These are the things that are really key that you maintain, and these are the things that we really need to see improvement on. You talk about actions, you come up with some actions. You can put your suggested actions in the presentation so that you see the discussion. You can use scores. There's a lot of controversy about, do you actually put numbers on these or not? You can. It's hard sometimes to do that. But if you're going to score one thing like delivery, then you have to score everything. It doesn't make sense to put scores on some of the components and not on others. Make sure your suppliers understand what the ratings mean. I recommend that you don't have a scale of 0 to 100, because if you come up with a number like 87, well, why isn't it 90? And you say, well, you know, I almost gave you an 85, but I gave you an 87 and they want a 90. So you're going to get into fussing over numbers, and that's not the purpose of this. So when you do have scales, when you do have numbers, it helps you compare suppliers. So you can, but you have to be consistent in how you do that, and that takes a little bit of calibration every time. So some areas you really need to be careful with. These cross-functional scores mean that you have a cross-functional team participating and coming up with the scores. So you need to have a meeting. I used to like to buy sandwiches or pizza and invite my stakeholders in and say, we're going to do this during lunch. So if they would come for the free food, they would offer their suggestions and their observations. They would look at the objective data and offer their subjective perspectives, which was fine. And we would get consensus as a team as to what the score was and what the assessment was. So the other thing you want to do is make sure that you have people prepared to elaborate and explain concerns. I know I had some instances where a person was very vocal in the stakeholder meeting saying that this supplier sucked. And yet when you got to the actual scorecard review and you said, okay, Bob, tell me what you told me in the prep meeting for this. And Bob shuts his mouth and just looks there and doesn't say anything. So if they have concerns and they really feel strongly about it, you don't want them venting and, you know, pounding the table or yelling, but you do want them to be clear about what is their concern, what is their issue, and where do they think the performance is not, and where does it need to be. Because surprises are a really bad thing. When you share these slides with suppliers and they haven't seen them before, they may get defensive. So it's always a good idea to send that a couple of days ahead and say, here, take a look. This is our assessment. Come prepared to talk about this. And here's what you need to know. So they need to be prepared to address the issues when you say your delivery has not been as good as we need it to be. And they can talk about what they are doing about that or whatever, versus hitting them cold and have them say, what do you mean our delivery is the problem? We've not seen any delivery problems, or we don't have any quality problems. You haven't sent anything back to us. Everything's been accepted, and your company is knee-deep in rework. So that's not a good thing. The only surprise that I recommend you do is if you have an award and you say, hey, we're going to give you a preferred supplier plaque or certificate. We have you're one of our 10 best suppliers of the year. Anything like that is always a welcome surprise. Those are fine, but make sure you do that with the senior management. Make it a big deal. You can bring in extra food on that. You can bring in something like that. You can have a nice dinner. And if you're doing these virtually, you can send a plaque or their certificate prior to the meeting, send it to your contact, say, hey, we're going to send you something. Can you just bring it to the meeting and open it there? We want to kind of go through that with you. So they may realize that it's a plaque or whatever, but that's fine. They're not going to open it. They're going to be happy about that. So in summary, these are very important activities. They help drive improvements. They reiterate the expectations that you set, and they reinforce those expectations. They help convey your full assessment of the performance so they get a full understanding of where they stand with you as a customer. So they know that they need to improve or maintain or sustain or change or. They understand what you want from them, with them going forward. These really help relationships. So if you have some relationships that are not as strong as you'd like them to be, the scorecard process should not be a contentious thing. It might be at first, but once you work through that, then you're going to get better relationships. You're going to identify risks more quickly. You're going to be able to eliminate some, mitigate some, share some with your suppliers, which is a great way to do that. They do require follow-up and follow-through. When you have that meeting and you come up with these 3 action items, someone has to track that and make sure that those action items get done. So you need action items, owners, due dates, and you need a responsible party, usually from the supply chain organization, from purchasing, that is going to be the point person on that to make sure that the supplier does their piece and you as a customer are doing your piece. They do require consistency. So you don't want to have a new format every time you meet over 4 times. You don't want to have a whole cast of new characters unless you had a major change in your employment. And so you do have to be consistent. So setting your template once, tweaking it is fine, but if you overhaul it and throw it out, then that creates more confusion and doesn't help. And they really, really do help improve your bottom line. So today's strive to thrive is continually seek ways to increase productivity, performance, and output. And that comes from Brian Tracy. So next week, we're going to talk about supplier relationship management. We're going to talk about why it's important, why we're still in the middle of this pandemic. And we're going to talk about building more trust, because this ambiguity that we have even more of in the pandemic can really erode that. Dynamic Dialog registration, sign up. If you want to sign up early for August, that's going to be in your email. And if you want to just talk to me, you can do callwithjane.com. And you get on my calendar and see how Purple Link can help your business. We have webinars scheduled next week for supply chain data analytics, and then CPSM. I was planning on doing CPSM number 3 starting in September, and I just added by request CPSM exam 1 that's going to start in September as well. The exam 1 is going to be a daytime class. I'm working with some people on the East Coast. And exam 3 will be an evening class, like a 6 o'clock class. And if you want to take either one of those, you can take them at your leisure, because I record all of the sessions and they're available to you for up to 3 months after the class completes. So it encourages you to pay attention, do the materials, read the refreshing slides, and take the test. So that's all I have today. I think I got all of the comments. If there were other, hopefully I got your comments and questions addressed. Thank you for everyone who contributes. And I'm 2 minutes over, so I will let you go for this week and hope to see you all next week.